Hi everyone, it's Alex Ott with Hustlecraft, and I'm so excited that we're launching our new series called Pivot. My first interview is with Scout of Scout's agency, and I'm going to introduce her and have her tell us a little bit about herself, and we'll dive into her pivot from last year. Hi.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I am so honored.
I'm so excited. We're finally connecting.
I know. Thinking about when we first met, which was over a year ago, to now, just the way people come back in and out of our lives, and but essentially the year we all had, it's just amazing that we're all kind of resurfacing and getting our groove back.
Yeah, absolutely. And as soon as I started to put this together and think about, this overused word, the pivot, I wanted to grab different people with totally different experiences in their pivot. And when you and I had a call and you had told me just how crazy things had exploded, I loved it because I'm going to be talking to somebody who totally left everything they ever knew. I'm talking to somebody else who, had basically come down to nothing and started from the ground up. And then I also love that you found yourself at a time where people were turning to podcasts for entertainment, daily life, everything, right? Like there was nothing else to do except maybe eat, have sex, and listen to podcasts, right?
Exactly. Literally, exactly.
Tell us more for the people who don't know about your agency and what you do, and then we can talk about the growth that you experienced last year.
Yeah, totally. So I am the founder and CEO of Scouts Agency, which I started in February 2019. So we've been around for just over 2 years, which is crazy. Time is so interesting, especially when you run a business. It goes by so fast, yet it also feels as if you've been doing this forever.
Yeah.
Essentially, what we do is we get women as guests on podcasts. So I started the agency after running Okay Sis Podcast with my sister, who's my co-host. We were about 6 months into the game, and I really recognized what was happening. We would have these guests on, and then our community, which, 2 years ago is not anywhere where it was today, as far as volume number wise. Just as cool though, they would follow our guest on Instagram, they would buy their products. And then when Mads and I started going as a guest on other podcasts, we would see our downloads go up, our Instagram numbers go up. And so I realized that being a guest on a podcast was, one, extremely powerful as far as, the conventional business ROI situation, right? I started identifying it as this incredible new form of PR. And two, why I was so emotionally drawn to it was because it was vulnerable, intimate, long form. You didn't read a quote on Refinery 29, which, believe me, has its merits for your business.
Right.
You listen to a founder for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, tell their story. And so I just said, there's something about this that's going to explode. And I started my agency actually starting to only represent female podcasters. Since that's the space I came from, I niched down. I felt that people could relate to me because I had my own podcast. And we started with 3 services that are booking high profile guests for your podcast. 2, the podcast tours, which is what we're super known for, which is getting women as guests on podcasts. And 3, we also do traditional PR. And then very quickly, I realized that our services could really help all female entrepreneurs, whether they were authors, personal brands, content creators, female founded products, you name it. And so today we represented a wide variety of women, from Rebecca Minkoff to Kat Sadler, Jessica Zweig, Vanessa Rossetto, Damona Hoffman. We do all of Bala's PR. And so it's been really, really amazing to, on a business side, help women's download sales, community members go up. And then on a more kind of emotional purpose side, provide women with platforms to tell their stories in front of new audiences and to provide connection in that sense. So that is what Scouts Agency does.
I have to say, and I told you this before, and I've told a few of my friends, that after I got off the phone with you the other day, and when I talked to you, I was having like a cloudy day. I truly will say this to you because I believe in complimenting people authentically, that you have your elevator down like more tight than like anybody I've ever met. Truly. Like every time you speak, you're not saying the exact same thing about what you do. So it's not like it's rehearsed, but it's so on point and it's so tight and it's so relevant that it speaks to me every time you speak. I almost like, not many people can leave me speechless because I am a talker and I am like curious upon like all things, but the way that you describe what you do is just, it's impeccable. I just want to tell you that.
Thank you. That means so much, because as I was talking, I was like, oh shit, I haven't like delineated the business from the emotional side of my business. I was just talking about it right there. So it's cool to, every time I do talk about my agency, I know what the core is, but I'm inspired to touch upon different aspects of it depending on the space and energy that I'm in that day.
Totally. I agree. And that's a beautiful thing about owning a business, is that the core of your service or the core of your audience remains usually the same, but the way you feel about it or what part of the business, is important to other people in that moment, in that day, what's happening in the world changes. And so the story gets to evolve, which is like the main reason why having a business is so interesting, because you evolve your business with the world, and therefore that kind of evolves who you are as a person as well.
Yes, 100%. I could not agree with you more.
So speaking of evolution, tell me a little bit about, because 2019, which is crazy to me, because when I met you, I thought you had been around for a long time, which also says a lot about that sort of like old soul that you have. Tell me about what it's like to have owned this agency for 1 year and then hit this pandemic and then come out of it here like today, because what a weird kind of sequence of things, but also so much growth.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when the pandemic hit, I never thought to myself, oh, I've only been in business for a year.
Right.
How could this happen a year into my business? Which is so interesting because actually, technically, at that point, I had only been playing in that level for 6 months. So the first 6 months of my agency was me working a full-time job and taking clients on the side. And I quit my full-time job about 3 or 4 months into the agency because I quickly saw that I could make enough, or I was making just about my full-time salary. And I am someone who is not risk averse, probably to a point that I wouldn't advise. I remember calling my dad and saying, okay, well, I'm making the same amount. I think I'm going to quit my day job. And him saying, yeah, it's a little early for that. And then I said, well, energetically, I feel like it's the right time. So I'm going to do it anyways. And I did.
That's our generation. Energetically, this is what feels right. And our parents are like, I'm sorry, what? Is there a plan here? What's happening?
Totally. And so for the first 6 months, it was just me. Like it was me and 10 clients. I worked in my friend's art studio because I just wanted a corner to be in that wasn't my house.
Right.
It wasn't really until the end of 2019 where I hired my first employee. I got an office, that things started quote unquote shaping up into traditional business mode, right? And so when the pandemic had hit, I had actually finally gotten my bearing. At the end of 2019, the last few months, our revenue actually took a major hit because my clients weren't on month-to-month retainers. I thought that in order to get clients, I had to give them flexibility. I thought and believed that nobody would work with me if I tied them down, that nobody would want to put the financial commitment, and my prices were quite low back then too. But once I saw the downside of that, which is I hired an employee, I signed a lease, half my roster went away in 1 week because I was on month to month.
Girl, I know that.
So I had to learn a really, really big lesson in that the last 3 months of 2019, I was scrambling. I was in scarcity mindset. I was going into sales calls desperate. And I think the major pivot for me actually happened December 2019 when I switched from scarcity mindset to abundant mindset. When I said, there are 6 billion, 7 billion people on this planet, there are enough clients for me. Just like there's enough clients for the PR agency down the road, there's 1, enough clients, and there's 2, an abundance of people that want to work with me. And I kind of just surrendered. I was like, I'm good, and I know they're going to come to me in the right way. And with that feminine energy, January 2020, we doubled revenue, started being profitable, and continued to rise. So when the pandemic hit, my husband, who is a scientist, told me in January that COVID pandemic was coming. When we went into lockdown, he said, no, this is the entire year. 2020 is canceled. So I think I had a little bit of a long-term mindset, but we lost 30% of our clients that month because they were restaurant owners, they were brick and mortar, etc. But I recognized, and I think that this also comes back to the abundance mindset. Yes, the economy was crumbling in a certain sector, but the economy wasn't crumbling in a different sector. There were people that I saw in that first month who couldn't keep up with orders. I saw people who were, selling out courses to the max. I saw people who were making a fuck ton of money. And so I said, okay, the world's going digital. That's what's going to happen this year. Who can I serve in the digital space who are recognizing, one, that they're pivoting to digital and they want to get their name out there because maybe they were more in-person events and now they're whatever.
How and can also cheers to the person who did it fast, because I think a lot of us stood there okay, I know I need to, but how the fuck am I going to do this? But I know it, anybody who's my age, which is 35, is okay, I had younger people who really did that for me. So okay, it's still a little freeze moment. So good on the people who were boom, 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 here it is, we got it.
Totally. And that's the people I recognize. And so I went after the people who were pivoting to digital and needed help getting their name out there, and B, people who were exploding already digitally and needed help telling their brand story. And that's how we pivoted. That's how we ended 2020 with a 250% revenue increase.
Wow.
And it's been, I hired someone in May and it was this crazy phenomenon, it was amazing. So, yeah.
That's incredible. And I think that it's what I love too, is that you knew when you even got into it pre-COVID, nothing, you felt the energy of the industry and how this was the future, because you saw, yes, the ROI and the numbers, but also you're clearly a person that feels the energy, or you wouldn't have told your dad that energetically this is the right thing to do, Dad, which is so funny because I was talking to Erwin, who I'm going to be interviewing for this series, and he literally said on the phone, we were doing a pre-interview, energetically, it's just the right thing to do. And I just laughed to myself because I'm fuck yes, that there's this whole generation of people that are listening to their gut, that are setting boundaries for themselves. And then beyond all that, also just going with the flow of what the universe is telling them. Because if we can be an example of a generation that starts to do that, I can only imagine what can follow. But so I think it's incredible also that you had the foresight of your husband to know that there was a whole year, because in my gut, and I'm a very energetic person as well, I felt immediately when I heard the first announcement of anything, I was we'll be here till September. I don't see there being a summer, because remember, people were oh my God, maybe by the 4th of July. And it just, in my soul, I felt very much till September. So when it kept going, I was surprised. And then there was a point recently, before this sort of lift came with the vaccine, that I thought we had another year. And so I was kind of okay, I was looking at life in a whole different way. So it's incredible, the energy now that's happening, because even going to get brunch or walking on the beach or whatever. I mean, thank God we live in San Diego. We're very lucky.
Oh God, thank God.
I know not everyone I'm interviewing is, but you and I are. Just the energy is so, it's, people say, it's the roaring 20s again, but it's really, it's cool to talk to somebody who didn't ever flinch, you actually hunker down even more, which is very rare.
Well, I think it's interesting to point out, and I was getting a little upset because I think that the collective narrative is different if you're an entrepreneur. So those first 2 weeks, the quotes on Instagram were you don't have to work as hard, you can rest, take this time, we're in a global pandemic, you don't have to hustle, all these things. And I would look at them and I was I have people on payroll, my ass, I'm not hustling right now. There is no way I'm letting anybody go, right? So I think for the business owner, those 2 weeks were a pressure point, because we live as entrepreneurs in uncertainty constantly. That's the game we signed up for, right? The fluctuations of our business revenue lands on our lifestyle at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so in those 2 weeks, I said to myself, anything can happen in this economy right now. Anything can happen. And I need to figure out a way to make my business stable, to make sure I pay my employee, all the things. And so I think that there was just a difference of experience. And look, at that point, I only had one employee. I can't imagine people who had 10, 20, 50, hundreds. That is a completely different experience. But just but just supporting one person's financial livelihood at that point was, to me, the world. It was the biggest responsibility I've ever had. It was my most treasured responsibility, and I wasn't going to fuck it up. I hope I can press on this because I've done it 25 times. And so,
but also you had a tool that could function in that space, whereas other people, like even myself, my clients were restaurants. They were like, bye, like, what are we going to do? Start a podcast about your restaurant that's closed? Like, probably not happening, So like, you are also lucky that while I totally like praise what you did, you had something that could easily have pivoted within this space because it was purely digital, which is so cool. Because, I mean, for so many others. And on the other side too, I had somebody in PR that was like, had some meme of them like working like crazy. And it was like, and I'm not an emotional person when it comes to work, but I was like, oh, lucky them, like must be nice, because like, I don't even have the opportunity to do, to be working like crazy,
Yeah. Total disclaimer that I'm talking about the people who had the opportunity to still play.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
For sure. There were industries and situations with the pandemic where the ability to pivot was not granted to people 100%.
Right.
I'm talking more about the people who had the opportunity to pivot, who could sit back and say, okay, what do we do here? Because there are options for us in this moment. Yeah, totally. There were
and also I think there was a lot of people that felt the burnout, and so they felt like, oh, okay, let's just reconcile, or let's just kind of let it be. But what I think is beautiful and that I want to honor in you is that there was no such thing inside of you, like that fire, because I had let my team go prior to the pandemic. I had given everybody notice in November 2019 because I realized I was working every day to pay 7 people's salaries, and I was over it. I was exhausted, stressed, and anxious. And my partner was like, you're doing this all for the 7 people. And like, you're not even taking that much. Why don't we, let's reconsider. Like, you're spending your whole life getting them paid. So I want to honor that. It meant so much to you that you had this staff member, that you worked so hard for that. And also that your fire was like, just like reignited, because that's a beautiful thing that I think a lot of people like wanted, but were like so burnt out that they, like, for me, I was like, okay, good. Like I took the time.
I do want to say real quick, because this is such an interesting conversation that I love to have, because it brings up so much in people. Because just me saying that, I am sure someone's going to be like, well, I didn't have the option, and it can trigger people significantly. I just want to say that my experience is totally mine, in the sense that if you wanted to chill in pandemic, like, fuck yeah, like, more power to you. At the end of 2020, I chilled. For sure. Yeah. I worked less than I have ever worked at the end of 2020. Like, and I was proudly walking around saying it,
Yeah.
And so I really believe in business being an ebb and flow of energy. There are months where you're more fired up, and there are months where you need a break. And knowing at what level you're at all times is key. Sure. I just happened to be, when the pandemic hit, at the fire stage in my life.
Right.
At the end of 2020, I was at the rest phase, 100%. Right. I was not hustling that much. And so I love to say that depending on where you're at in your career, depending on your industry, depending on your career, depending on your role,
your mental health, I mean,
it goes like this. It's a wave, always a wave.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to say, A, some people had the opportunity and didn't, and acknowledge that, but B, the praise that you like, because again, every person that I interview for this series is going to have gone through. That's why that's why we're talking about this, because it's business owners or creatives who also either got fired up, lost everything, weren't fired up. You know, like for me, I did nothing for a while. And then like last month I called 5 people and now my business is bigger than it's ever been. And I'm doing it by myself and it's so much better to do it.
That's what you had to do. That's
right.
exactly what you had to do. And if you don't do what you have to do, that's where you get into trouble. It doesn't have to look like hustling and pivoting immediately. It can look like taking a year to figure out what the hell is going on here, you know?
Right. And
so,
my hope is also always like, and I appreciate when other, usually women, you know, preface, you know, and then sometimes I'm just like, are people really looking at this and going, well, I have to do it like her because
they are. That's the problem. No, it's a problem. It's a problem.
Yeah, I forget that because I never did that. I was always like, wow, she's really dope. But I wasn't like, oh my God, okay, roadmap to success. I was just like, I was always feeling my own vibe and my own energy. But I forget that like the reason we are where we are is because we listened to our own vibe and our own energy and we didn't take a roadmap. And there's girls who think they need to roadmap and be like, she took a full year off. It's like, oh, bitch, I'm not saying you should do that.
Yeah, there's Africa Brooke, who is incredible. She talks
just posted something.
She's amazing. She says, and it's so interesting because I think this is where we're going, is she says that we think that every piece of content, everything someone says has to completely resonate with you. And so whatever I say, if that doesn't resonate with you and if it's not where you're at, what I'm preaching is not the Bible, you know what I mean? And so I think it's so interesting, especially when you're building your dream life as entrepreneurs and creatives. You just said it so perfectly. We did it because we want to go our own way. And so hearing other people's stories is so important because we get to take things, try them on, see what works, see what resonates. And we have zero obligation to take everything. We can leave things at the door. And sometimes I think we forget that. I think that we listen to somebody who has a different experience and then we're very quick to say, well, that doesn't work for me. And we get upset. But really, like, we can just leave it at the door. Not everything everyone's going to say is going to work for everybody.
Well, and that's why I wonder sometimes when I think about my dreams of goals of becoming bigger, either as a speaker or like a professor, and I love doing this interview type, you know, work, is if I'm just being honest, I don't really give a fuck what people think. So the thought of somebody coming and being like upset that like I'm not very compassionate for that, which I probably should be. I don't have time for that. Like, but also you just said what my motto has been for this year, which is I kind of took a look at everything that was either broken, fully together, fully functioning, non-functioning. It's like looking at every piece of old technology and what was dusty and what was broken. And I just cleared house. And now I have this very kind of like simple thing going on where I have like 3 small clients, but then like my 3 small businesses. And it's just like, there's a flow, but I could never like give people advice. I can just tell them what I've done. But I guess my question kind of is, and we're going a little off track, like, how did that ever get misconstrued? Like, how did it ever go from like, here's my life, here's my story, here's how this happened to me, to like people thinking that it's about them?
I think it's just because emotions are so high this year and everyone on some level has gone through hell, has gone through a very, very collective trauma. Whether that looks like just being completely torn up from the inside over the uncertainty of the world, pausing for the first time, no matter how hard you worked in those 3 months, there was a lot of pause, there was a lot of stillness, there was a lot of being, realizing that they're uncomfortable in their own mind, realizing that the frameworks of what they thought their world was going to look like isn't the case, understanding that we're not in control here, something else is in control. Or to a point where it wasn't just existential and emotional, but it was survival. Jobs, you lost your job, you couldn't pay your rent, whatever it was. Business owners went down, businesses closed. Whatever spectrum of total uncertainty, chaos, and pain you were in, we all were in that. And so we're a little bit of a raw wound. And so when you pour now some salt water on it, before the wound was closed and the salt water would kind of run off, and now it's burning. And so I think that we are all just inflated with emotions, and we'll come down, we'll ground, we'll get a little bit more foundational. But it is something that I think so often about, because I do have a podcast and I am many times afraid of the mob, many times afraid of cancel culture. And knowing that I sit here and what I think I am a really good person who believes and strives towards a better world and helps people promote their mental health and believes in social activism and all of those things, that if someone like me is afraid, there is a bigger collective story going on. But I've come to a place where I can't be afraid to tell my story just because it might trigger somebody. And if it does trigger you,
what is the responsibility ultimately, in your opinion, because you are a podcaster who has to also be a publicist? So it's like, both sides, where it's like you might need to jump in and save some ass if the mob gets crazy. I mean, I don't know that that's your full role, but like at what point, like what is your general take on the responsibility? And I'm not trying to put you in like some type of corner, but like I'm fascinated by like how far do we have to go to please people's emotions?
My responsibility is to be true to myself.
Amen, sis.
My responsibility is to share my experience, and my responsibility is to be confident, secure, and grounded enough in myself that if I misstep, I can provide myself some grace for being a human being. And I know in my heart, if I misstep, whether it's ignorance, whether it's triggering people, whatever the case is, from business to gender equality to sexuality to race, everything, mental health, whatever it might be, that I know I will do the work no matter what. And so I can just sit here confident in who I am, what my values are, what my intention is, what I'm prepared to do if I misstep. And I can hope that the world would see that too. I mean, look, I'm not like the Bachelorette who's saying something and getting on a scandal, but we have come to a point where everybody, I think, is feeling this collective fear. And so I just have to come back to me, what I can and can't control. I also get to come back to me on what I am prepared to do if I misstep. And I am now, which took a long time, willing to misstep. I'm willing to misstep. Whoever said we couldn't misstep? That's not human. It's not human. And so I am willing to be human. Period.
Beautiful. And that's probably where a lot of this freedom and fire comes from.
Yeah, I think that I am very in tune. I live with bipolar disorder, and so I'm very emotionally in tune. And so when something doesn't feel good in me, there's a reason for that. And I get to examine it, and I get to figure out what the root is. And then I get to act either despite of it, or in spite of it, or with it, or against it, whatever it might be. But I think we just have to come back a little bit more to compassion and empathy. Obviously, there are things that are being done in this world that are horrific and should never require empathy or compassion. Yeah. But I'm talking about just like on a human scale, your neighbor, the person you follow on Instagram, the person you get your coffee from, there's
been a lot of projection of anger and loss and identity onto other people. And, I do actually want to know a little bit more about Okay Sis, because I think it's really cool how that's evolved. First and foremost, that you do it with your sister, which is so great. So tell us how it started, but also when you and I were talking about it last time, like how it evolved into really talking to women who own products that you guys love, and like how much more intimate it's kind of become as a result of it being based on things that are, used in your everyday life.
Yeah. So essentially, I had my own podcast a very long time ago because I lived next to a podcast studio. Random story, they let me in for free, but I wasn't really treating it like a business. And then my sister and I were at Ojai Valley Inn and Spa for her birthday. We had some rosé, we're at the pool, and I was like, I don't have a podcast episode next week because I'm really bad at my podcast. Do you want to hop on? And my podcast was a lot more about mental health, spirituality, etc. And so she's, we talked about pop culture and The Bachelor the whole time. We recorded it on my phone in the business center. It was very random. We ate truffle chips the whole time. The audio quality was terrible, but there was something about it that I really, really loved. Like there was something within the energy of me and my sister that just filled me up, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so 2 weeks later, I was like, we have to do something together. And we landed on a podcast. So I shut mine down. 2 weeks later, we started ours. And it has been a journey. It has been such a journey. It's been 2.5 years. We just got signed to a network, Podcast Nation, which we're really excited about.
Wow, congrats.
Thank you. And we've been introduced to incredible female entrepreneurs that own amazing products. We've even done kind of like the Batch Nation circuit, YouTubers, influencers, really every type of woman. We've had every conversation from how to heal from eating disorders to psychology to Bachelor Nation to content creation to business to investing to what it's like to get. We interviewed the founder of Topicals, who was the youngest Black woman to raise over $1 million in investment. So what that experience was like, it's just been so eye-opening to not have a niche as far as the type of woman we talk to, because
I like that.
We've been able to uncover stories that are so amazing to hear. So it's been amazing.
Awesome. And so what do you have coming up? Because now we're talking about the pivot and we're trying to like bring it all full circle, right? So you talked to us about how it got started, the toughness of the end of the year, the kind of like fire that emerged in a beautiful way. I will say not fire, maybe explosion of ideas and the way that the company evolved. And so coming back to today, what do you have looking forward to? Do you have any fun announcements that we can share? Fun upcoming episodes that you want people to tune into, things on Clubhouse? Let us know.
Yeah. So another pivot we're making is that Scout's agency up until this point has been a one-on-one client-based agency. So our revenue model is one-on-one account work, on 3 to 6 month retainers. And so we're really looking to add in different types of business models. So we are coming out in the next few months with a self-led course called Get Yourself as a Guest on Podcasts.
Cool.
Which basically, if you are at a point in your business where you are not able, or you just don't really prioritize or want to sign on for a monthly retainer service, I give it all away. I'm giving exactly how we write our pitches, exactly how we find the podcast, all the information you need. You go through this self-led course and it basically shows you how to manage your own podcast tour. So we have that coming up. And then I have my first book coming out later this year, which I haven't talked too much about the details, but if you follow me at Scout Sobel, you will be the first to know about when it launches.
That's so exciting. And when that does launch, I want to talk to you again because I want to know all about that process, which I'm sure is just like a whole nother 45 minutes worth of.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing not only like your heart, but just like your energy and your spirit and the way that you follow your gut. You were just so honest and vulnerable, and you were true to yourself, which is what you preach. So you practice what you preach, and I appreciate that so much.
Thank you. This was so fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I hope we can get together soon. And nonetheless, we'll be launching this next week, and I'm so excited to share it with everyone.
Oh my God, thank you. Are we still, we're off now. Are we off?
Nope, we are off.